The summer air over Brandenburg shimmered like a mirage. On the cracked concrete of Rechlin Airfield, a lone figure walked toward a fighter plane that, by all rights, shouldn't have been there. Hauptmann Vera Tierfelder, Luftwaffe test pilot, squinted through the heat haze. Before him sat an aircraft painted in rough olive drab. The paint was faded, scratched, scarred by war. But what made his pulse tighten were the insignia black Luftwaffe crosses crudely brushed over ghostly white American stars, a captured P-51 Mustang. Even standing still, it looked predatory, sleek, alien. Tierfelder moved around it slowly, like a wolf circling an intruder. Every line of the airframe seemed wrong by German standards, too thin, too light, too delicate. His fingers traced the laminar flow wing, feeling its uncanny smoothness. This was the design German engineers had dreamed of, theorized, but never managed to build. He could almost hear the echo of what this machine meant. If the reports were true, it was rewriting the laws of air combat. For years, Tierfelder had flown everything the Reich could produce: Messerschmitts, Focke-Wulfs, even captured Spitfires and Yaks. Each one told a story of craftsmanship, of limits, of evolution. But this was something else entirely. Rumors had already reached Rechlin. Pilots over the Western Front were being torn apart by an escort fighter that shouldn't exist, a long-range aircraft that could fly to Berlin and back while still outperforming Germany's best interceptors. According to every principle of German aerodynamics, that was impossible. A fighter with that kind of range should be too heavy, too slow, too sluggish to dogfight. And yet, the Mustang was doing exactly that. The wreckage of the Reich's air superiority lay scattered across the skies, pilots reporting duels where they couldn't dive away, couldn't outclimb, couldn't even choose when to fight. Now, on this hot July afternoon, Tierfelder was about to find out why. As he climbed into the Mustang's cockpit, the world felt strangely reversed. English dials, American ergonomics. A bubble canopy offering a full, open sky, a view so wide it almost mocked the claustrophobic cages of German fighters. When the Merlin engine roared to life beneath him, its deep, confident hum didn't sound like war. It sounded like inevitability. What Tierfelder was about to learn in the next 47 minutes would quietly confirm what the Luftwaffe dared not admit. The age of German air superiority was over. Vera Tierfelder had been flying since the war's beginning long enough to see the Luftwaffe's arrogance evolve into desperation. He'd fought in the skies over Britain, chased shadows in the east, and tested everything his engineers could put in the air. He wasn't a zealot, he was a professional. And professionals measured truth by what they could feel through the stick, not by what they were told in speeches. The Mustang before him challenged everything he thought he knew. He studied the aircraft like a predator, learning its rival's anatomy. The fuselage, slender, almost fragile, seemed laughably light compared to the muscular frames of the Bf-109 or the Focke-Wulf 190. The wings were thin, their surface unnaturally smooth. The metal skin fitted so precisely that light seemed to slide over it. German engineers had heard whispers of this technology, laminar flow aerodynamics. A theory they'd understood but never mastered. To make it work, you needed production so precise that even a rough rivet or a layer of paint could ruin it. Tierfelder felt the metal. No uneven edges. No seams. Just a cold, seamless perfection that only a factory system, not hand craftsmanship, could achieve. That was America's secret. Not brilliance, not magic. Consistency. Inside the cockpit, it was the same revelation. Everything made sense. The dials were clean, intuitive, arranged for a pilot's convenience, not an engineer's. Pride. Labels were neatly translated into German manifold pressure, fuel mixture, coolant temperature. He smiled at the thought. American ergonomics, he muttered under his breath. They designed the aircraft around the man. We designed the man around the aircraft. It was a quiet, almost painful truth. German design culture valued discipline, precision, and complexity. American design valued usability. Tierfelder gripped the throttle. It felt natural, even though it was on the wrong side, the left, unlike German aircraft. Within minutes, his hand found its rhythm. Below it sat the mixture and propeller controls. The Americans had automated them. The engine adjusted itself to maintain optimum speed and power. No fiddling. No guesswork. The pilot could focus on survival. He leaned back and looked through the canopy, the kind of visibility German pilots had begged for since 1940. A single, clear bubble of plexiglass. No metal frame cutting the horizon into blind spots. You could see everything, every threat, every escape route. Tierfelder felt a faint unease crawl under his skin. This wasn't just a machine. It was a philosophy made metal. Make it simple, make it reliable, make it for the human using it. On the ground, the mechanics watched as he began pre-flight checks. They were nervous. The Mustang's Merlin engine was particular. It needed high-octane fuel that Germany could barely produce anymore. Today, they were using captured American gasoline from a seized depot in France. He called out the final checklist. Mixture rich. Prop full forward. Magnetos both. His thumb pressed the starter. The propeller spun once, twice, and the engine came alive. Not with the metallic bark of a Daimler-Benz or the uneven rattle of a BMW radial, but with a deep, confident purr. It sounded civilized, refined. It was the hum of industry, the product of factories that could build 10,000 engines, each one identical, each one perfect. He felt the vibration through his boots, steady and smooth. No hesitation, no stutter. For a man raised in the mythology of German engineering supremacy, that sound was quietly devastating. As the engine settled into idle, Tierfelder's face hardened. He wasn't here to admire the enemy. He was here to dissect it and to prove that somewhere, somehow, it had a flaw. But as he released the brakes and began taxiing toward the runway, he already suspected the truth he didn't want to say aloud. Maybe the flaw wasn't in the machine. Maybe it was in the doctrine that built his own. The tail lifted, the concrete blurred beneath him, and the Mustang leapt into the air like a living thing. Tierfelder's instincts, sharpened by years of flying Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, immediately sensed it. This aircraft wasn't fighting gravity. It ignored it. The acceleration was clean, continuous, almost unnerving. By the time his altimeter touched 1,500 meters, the Mustang was already faster than most Luftwaffe fighters could ever dream of being at full throttle. He retracted the landing gear. A solid think, no vibration, no wobble. Then something subtle happened, a feeling he couldn't quite describe. The Mustang relaxed. It didn't strain, didn't twitch. It sliced through the sky as though it belonged there, balanced and smooth, stable yet alive, under his hands. He made a small aileron input, a lazy roll to the left, then to the right. The aircraft obeyed instantly, with a grace he'd never felt in a fighter before. No stiffness, no lag. In a Focke-Wulf, every movement was a fight, power against air, control against chaos. In the Mustang, there was harmony. He pushed the throttle forward. The Merlin engine's growl deepened, and the airspeed needle began its climb. 300 kilometers per hour, 400, 500, still accelerating. At 600, the Mustang felt as solid as ever. At 700, Tierfelder's pulse quickened. The air outside screamed against the canopy, and Brandenburg's farmland began to melt into green and gold blurs below. Then he looked at the dial. 715 kilometers per hour. Faster than any prop-driven German fighter in existence. He sat there in silence, staring at the instrument panel as the truth sank in. It wasn't just a fast plane. It was a fast plane with range. And that combination, by every law of German aerodynamics, was supposed to be impossible. He began to climb. 5,000 meters, 6,000. The Mustang rose effortlessly. The Merlin's two-stage supercharger feeding smooth, consistent power into the thin air. At 8,000 meters, most German engines gasped for oxygen. The Mustang just kept going. 9,000. 10,000. Still stable. Still powerful. At that altitude, the Luftwaffe's fighters became sluggish, their wings heavy, their engines choking. But the Mustang felt comfortable. Tierfelder rolled level at 10,000 meters and smiled grimly. Now he understood. This was how American pilots ruled the sky. They could dive down through the bomber formations, pick their fights, and climb away before a German interceptor could even reach firing range. The Mustang didn't just fly faster, it dictated combat. It decided when the battle began and when it ended. He tried a tight turn, half expecting the weight of the aircraft to betray it. Instead, the Mustang responded cleanly, predictably. Not quite as tight as a Bf-109 at low altitude, but astonishingly agile for something carrying the fuel to fly from England to Berlin and back. He leveled out, trimmed for cruise, and watched the fuel gauge. After 40 minutes of aggressive climbing and diving, the tanks were still over half full. Impossible. Every number he'd been taught, every chart and lecture, all of it was wrong. And then came the dive test. He pointed the nose down 30 degrees, then 45. The ground began to rush up. 500 kilometers per hour. 600. 700. The airframe didn't shake. The controls didn't lock. 750. 800. He felt resistance, but never loss of control. The ailerons still answered. The elevator still obeyed. He pulled back hard, 4 Gs, pressed him into the seat, and the Mustang responded instantly, climbing back with the grace of a falcon. No German fighter could have done that and survived. He exhaled slowly, the oxygen mask fogging with his breath. There was no more denying it. Everything he'd just felt, every sound and vibration, every number on his instruments, they all said the same thing. Germany was fighting a war against the future. And in that future, the Mustang already reigned. As he leveled off and pointed back toward Rechlin, the cockpit was filled with the calm hum of inevitability. The sunlight caught the edge of the bubble canopy, reflecting across his eyes. He knew what his report would say. He also knew no one in Berlin would want to read it. 47 minutes in the quarter now. Air and Vera Tierfelder had seen the end of the Luftwaffe. When Vera Tierfelder landed the Mustang back at Rechlin, he didn't step out right away. He just sat there for a few seconds, staring through the canopy at the runway, heat rising like a mirage. He'd flown countless aircraft, but none had ever made him feel obsolete. As the engine wound down, ground crew surrounded the Mustang. Their faces were eager, expectant. They wanted to hear what the Luftwaffe's best test pilot thought of America's wonder machine. He didn't speak. Not yet. He was still processing what those 47 minutes had revealed. That everything the Reich's engineers had promised, every superior design, every revolutionary model had just been outperformed by a plane the Americans built by the thousands. That evening, Tierfelder began to write. His report was meticulous, the kind only a test pilot could compose. Each sentence stripped of emotion, every observation precise, clinical, undeniable. Maximum speed at 4,500 meters, 715 kilometers per hour. Service ceiling, 12,770 meters. Rate of climb at sea level, 16.3 meters per second. Combat radius, 1,210 kilometers with drop tanks. Those numbers alone told the story. No German fighter could match even half those endurance figures. But Tierfelder went further. He compared, he analyzed, and he concluded. The Mustang is faster than the Focke-Wulf 190 at all altitudes, climbs better above 6,000 meters, dives better, and has triple the combat radius. The Messerschmitt 109 retains marginal advantage in low-altitude turns, but overall the Mustang is superior in nearly all combat scenarios. He paused before typing the next line. It was the sentence that would sting the most. The P-51 represents a fundamental shift in fighter design philosophy, from craftsmanship to efficiency, from specialization to ADA, versatility. That wasn't just technical analysis, it was an obituary for German air power. By morning, the report was stamped, filed, and carried up the Luftwaffe chain of command. It passed across the desks of officers who had built their careers on the myth of German engineering supremacy. They read it in silence, and most of them quietly buried it. Some called it exaggerated. Others called it defeatist. A few dismissed Thierfelder himself as too impressed by foreign machines. But deep down, they all knew the truth. The Mustang wasn't just an aircraft. It was proof that Germany had lost not only the air war, but the technological race itself. In Berlin, propaganda still screamed that new weapons would change the war's tide. Jet fighters, rocket interceptors, miracle planes drawn on chalkboards. But Thierfelder's report stamped confidential, Rechlin evaluation, No. 57, sat quietly in an archive folder, testifying to a truth too dangerous to admit. That the Luftwaffe wasn't being beaten by numbers alone. It was being beaten by method. In private, Thierfelder shared the findings with other test pilots. They all came to the same conclusion. The Mustang was everything their own fighters tried and failed to be. Fast, high-flying, agile, long-legged, and forgiving enough for even a young pilot to master. They could only shake their heads and mutter what none dared to write. If this aircraft had a swastika on its tail instead of a star, we might still own the skies. But it didn't. It bore the mark of a nation that Germany's ideology had labeled inferior, a nation that had simply outbuilt, outtrained, and outlasted them. As the months passed, Thierfelder's report became one of many quietly shelved documents, test data, captured evaluations, technical analyses, all leading to the same grim realization. By 1944, German ingenuity was running on fumes, and the Rechlin Mustang was the proof. It wasn't only a symbol of Allied air dominance. It was a mirror showing the Luftwaffe exactly what it had become, a relic of yesterday's war. In the weeks after his flight, Thierfelder found himself haunted not by the Mustang's speed or firepower, but by its simplicity. It wasn't a masterpiece of exotic engineering. It was something far more dangerous, an elegant solution produced at scale. The Mustang had been designed to be built, not worshipped. Every part of it, from the laminated propeller blades to the self-sealing fuel tanks, told the same story. Practicality over perfection. That philosophy was alien to the Reich. Germany built aircraft the way it built ideology, on the conviction that complexity was proof of superiority. Every Focke-Wulf, every Messerschmitt, every Me-262 was a sculpture of over-engineering. Each demanded highly skilled labor, hand-fitted parts, and endless maintenance. The Mustang was different. It was democratic engineering, built by semi-skilled hands on factory lines that never slept. Identical, down to the bolt. Every Mustang that left a North American aviation plant in California or Texas could trade parts with any other Mustang in Europe and fly perfectly. That was the quiet brilliance of American war production consistency. The Germans had the theory. They understood laminar flow wings, multi-stage superchargers, and drag reduction. But they couldn't produce it. Their factories couldn't hold the tolerances. Their materials were rationed. Their workers exhausted. Their infrastructure bombed day and night. To achieve laminar flow, even a rivet slightly misaligned could destroy the effect. The Americans did it by the thousands. German engineers, with all their genius, could barely achieve it once. The Mustang's wing wasn't just an aerodynamic triumph, it was a manufacturing miracle. The Packard-built Merlin engine told the same story. It wasn't superior in theory to the Daimler-Benz engines that powered the Bf-109. But in practice, it was reliable. Every Merlin that rolled off an American assembly line produced the same output with the same precision every time. German engines varied. One might roar, another might rattle. They were victims of their own craftsmanship, too dependent on the human hand, too fragile to mass produce. And then there was fuel. The Merlin drank 150-octane gasoline, a quality Germany couldn't make anymore. The Reich's synthetic fuel plants, already bombed into rubble, could barely keep the Luftwaffe flying. By late 1944, there were aircraft sitting on airfields across Germany, ready to fight, but grounded. Not for lack of pilots, not for lack of courage, for lack of fuel. The Mustang was proof that victory didn't belong to whoever designed the best machine, it belonged to whoever could build enough of them. Germany built perfection. America built endurance. The Mustang could cross an ocean of flak, duel at 10,000 meters, and still bring its pilot home. It didn't need to be the absolute best at any one thing, it was good enough at everything. And that balance was what made it unstoppable. At Rechlin, engineers studied the captured plane for weeks. They measured every line, photographed every surface, dismantled and cataloged every mechanism. They produced full-scale blueprints and compared them to their own Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts. In private, several engineers admitted it openly. We could copy this, but we cannot produce it. That single sentence said more than any intelligence report could. The Luftwaffe's problem was no longer innovation, it was capacity. Every hour that Germany spent perfecting the Me-262 or refining the Bf-109K was an hour the Americans spent producing another 100 Mustangs. By the time those German projects reached the sky already belonged to the Mustang. Even the Reich's most advanced jet, the Me-262, could not save them. Yes, it was faster. But it was unreliable, underfueled, and constantly ambushed during takeoff and landing by the very aircraft Thierfelder had flown. The irony was brutal. The jet, Germany's proudest symbol of progress, couldn't escape the piston-driven future that outnumbered and outlasted it. When Thierfelder reviewed his own report weeks later, he underlined one phrase he had written without realizing its weight. The Mustang represents a fusion of engineering and industry, of design and democracy. That was what Germany could never build. Not because it lacked intelligence or skill, but because its entire system was built on the myth that genius could replace numbers, that will could overcome mathematics. The Mustang proved otherwise. It showed that in modern war, efficiency was the new superiority. By October of 1944, the once secret testing fields of Rechlin no longer felt like the heart of German aviation. They felt like a mausoleum. The captured Mustang, the same one Thierfelder had flown that July afternoon, still sat under camouflage netting near Hangar 4. Its faded olive paint was now streaked with dust, its propeller covers tied down against the wind. Engineers still came to study it, to measure, to dream. But everyone knew the truth. There was no longer enough aluminum, enough fuel, or enough time to build what it represented. The Reich was collapsing. Allied bombers ruled the daylight. Even Rechlin, once considered far beyond the front lines, now trembled beneath the distant thunder of American raids. Somewhere in a file cabinet marked Geheim, Thierfelder's report lay buried among dozens of similar evaluations. Captured Spitfires, Thunderbolts, Yaks, all dissected, all compared, all overshadowed by a single aircraft that no one could surpass. The P-51 Mustang wasn't just an airplane anymore. It had become a symbol of everything Germany couldn't be. In the early days of 1945, Rechlin was evacuated. Soviet forces were advancing fast, and there was no time to save much. Some aircraft were flown east to temporary fields. Most were destroyed in place to prevent capture. What became of the Mustang is lost to history. One report claims it was blown up during a demolition sweep. Another suggests it was left on the dispersal pad and strafed by Allied fighters. Others say the Soviets might have found its remains when they reached Brandenburg, a burnt-out shell with faded Luftwaffe crosses still painted over the ghosts of American stars. Whatever the truth, the Mustang vanished into the smoke of Germany's collapse, but its legacy and the lesson it carried endured. After the war, Thierfelder survived captivity. Captured by American forces in May 1945, he spent several months in a POW camp. When Allied intelligence began debriefing captured test pilots, his name quickly surfaced. They wanted technical insight and honesty, and that's exactly what they got. Thierfelder described the Mustang in detail, its flight stability, its high-altitude behavior, its ease of control. When asked to compare it with German fighters, he didn't hesitate. It was the finest all-around fighter of the war, he told them. Better than the Focke-Wulf, better than the Messerschmitt, Even better than the jet because it worked every time. The Americans, fascinated by his objectivity, asked what impressed him most. He didn't mention speed or firepower or range. He said simply, it was ready, always ready. That word ready summarized everything the Luftwaffe had lost. Germany had prototypes. The Americans had production. Germany had brilliance. The Americans had execution. Thierfelder lived quietly after the war, never glorifying his service. He spoke occasionally with aviation historians, contributing to post-war studies that analyzed the collapse of the Luftwaffe. When asked about the Mustang, he always smiled faintly before answering. The machine flew like it knew it would win, he said once. Ours fought as if they already knew. They'd lost. It wasn't bitterness. It was truth. That single flight over Brandenburg had stripped away every illusion he'd been taught. The myth of German technical invincibility. The faith that craftsmanship could replace quantity. That ideology could outweigh logistics. Today, the Mustang's legacy endures not just as a beautiful aircraft, but as a revelation in metal and motion. It proved that innovation isn't enough. Replication is what wins wars. That progress means nothing if it can't be scaled. And that sometimes the greatest weapon isn't a new invention, it's the ability to make the same invention again and again perfectly until the enemy runs out of sky. In the end, the Mustang didn't just defeat Germany's fighters, it defeated their belief system. Because while the Reich was obsessed with perfection, the Allies learned the truth. Thierfelder wrote into his report, "Perfection is fragile. Reliability wins wars." When Rechlin fell, the hangars burned, and the Mustang vanished into history, but its ghost lingered. For decades afterward, pilots would speak of that captured plane, the one painted with both crosses and stars, as if it were a specter of transition, a symbol of the moment Germany's myth finally met reality. The story of that captured Mustang is not just a footnote in aviation history, it's a mirror, one that reflected the exact moment when the old world realized it could no longer keep up with the new. 47 minutes in the air. That's all it took for a loyal German test pilot, trained in the cult of technical superiority, to confront the truth his nation could no longer deny. That speed, that range, that elegance, none of it came from ideology. It came from method. From factories running 24 hours a day. From engineers willing to simplify instead of glorify. From a system that valued adaptability over pride. The P-51 Mustang didn't win because it was flawless. It won because it was enough in overwhelming numbers. When Thierfelder closed his report, he likely knew no one would read it carefully. It would vanish into the paper maze of a dying war machine. Too honest, too damning, too late. But his words survived in spirit, whispered later by those who saw the same horizon he did, that victory in modern war belonged not to the perfectionist, but to the producer. Germany built masterpieces that were too delicate to sustain. America built workhorses that never stopped flying. And when the two met over Europe, the result was inevitable. For Thierfelder, the realization must have carried a strange irony. He'd been raised on the certainty that German skill could overcome any odds that the Reich's precision and intellect defined destiny. But up there, in that clear bubble canopy, watching the Brandenburg field slide beneath him, he felt something different. Not defeat, not even shame, just clarity. The Mustang didn't humiliate him, it educated him. It showed him that the war was no longer about who could build the sharpest sword, but who could forge 1,000 of them before breakfast. By the spring of 1945, Germany's skies were quiet. Not because its enemies had stopped flying, but because the Luftwaffe had nothing left that could. Factories lay in ruins, runways cracked and empty, pilots without planes, planes without fuel. And somewhere among the wreckage of Rechlin, that captured Mustang the one Thierfelder had flown likely rusted away, its once polished aluminum dulled by dust and time. But in that forgotten wreck sat the embodiment of a turning point in history. A machine that proved engineering genius means nothing without the means to sustain it. In the decades that followed, Historians and engineers would study the Mustang and write of its beauty, its performance, its grace. But for the men who faced it in the sky, it meant something deeper. It was the sound of inevitability, the hum of an industry that could not be outbuilt, the symbol of a war decided not just in the clouds, but in the factories that fed them. And for one German pilot, on one July afternoon, it was a revelation that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In 47 minutes, he would later tell his interrogators, "I saw the truth, and it had wings." The captured Mustang, the day German pilots realized the future had already arrived.